Pit there, a piece of garlic or a whole clump of garlic and a picture of the Pope, which Giancarlo Fisichella is obviously confident will ward off any bad spirits and help him on his way to a points finish.
Fantastic, fantastic. We wouldn't be here without
Max.
Absolutely
just do great.
Yep. Hi guys.
Hi, hello there.
To sacrifice it for the race, but it's the race you get the points, and that's where we want to score.
Is he a good race driver, Sato? Is he developing into a good race driver?
I think he makes unbelievable starts. Having said that, he'll probably do a horrible one today, but I believe he makes great starts. He is a real fighter. Watch him on the first couple of laps because he is absolutely dynamic. And there's no reason to believe he won't stay up with the big boys.
Thanks very much, Eddie. One final question. Any headache this morning? Any headaches this morning? I'll let you say.
Live with headaches in that pit lane. Now then, just under 4 hours to go until the 2002 British Grand Prix. Still confused as to who you think might win? Well, maybe a look back at the 2001 Grand Prix might help. Jack, thanks for joining us. A good result so far at the British Grand Prix weekend. Would it be fair to say you're optimistic about this race, more optimistic than you have been for some time?
Yeah, the car's been working well all weekend, in the wet, in the dry. So, in general, we're more competitive in the race than in qualifying. So yeah, there's something to be excited about.
What about this track? It's not the home race for you, obviously, but it is for many of the team. Do you enjoy Silverstone?
It's a fun track to drive, most of the lap anyway. There's the two tight chicanes, Vale and Abbey, that are very annoying, but the rest of the lap is beautiful.
You had the chance earlier this week to go around the Honda factory, meet some of the guys, some of the many guys behind you in Formula One. Do you enjoy that sort of thing?
Oh, it's very important because everybody's working hard. We are at a racetrack, but the people that are not at the racetrack, at the factory, are working hard as well. So it's an important boost.
Jack, thanks for joining us. Good luck in the race.
You don't want to tempt fate or anything like that, but he went very well this morning, Takuma, didn't he?
Well, we went equally badly yesterday. That's the trade-off. We went on a much harder tyre. I think the race here is so important, and to open the opportunities that are available. It could rain, it may stay dry. We've got now, from Friday, we have a very good wet setup, and this morning finally on the hard tyre, which was a disadvantage yesterday, but hopefully will play into our hand today.
When you say harder, you're talking about relative to Ferrari?
I think Ferrari, probably one of their drivers is on the same tyre as us. I'm not sure about the other. Obviously, it's all cloaked in.
Well, the Ferrari drivers say they're on the same tyres.
I wouldn't believe that for one moment, and neither would you if you were on. But anyway, leaving that side aside, I can tell you both of ours are on the same, and we're both on the hard tyre. It's always a difficult pill to do because the qualifying is so important, and to give up a small advantage by going on a softer tyre in the qualifying, to sacrifice it for the race, but it's the race you get the points, and that's where we want to score.
In wet conditions, although not terribly wet, but the rain's still falling at the moment as everybody prepares for another race that's coming up. There will be an F3 support race coming up before the start of the Grand Prix, but it's the Grand Prix that everyone is now thinking about, looking forward to, and wondering, is it going to be dry, is it going to be wet, and how will that affect the relative performances of the likes of Ferrari and Williams? Certainly from what Ron Dennis said earlier on, it could well favour the Ferraris and those intermediate Bridgestone tyres. But in the Super Cup race we've seen a great effort from Wolf Hensler. He now has moved up into third place in the championship, courtesy Philip Peter, who failed lap, fighting his way back up, but finding it a bit harder once he got into the middle of the battle between Damien Faulkner and Darren Manning. Manning coming through as best of the Brits in 9th place. Unfortunately, we lost Richard Westbrook with what looked like a mechanical failure earlier in the race. But for the British fans there, Darren Manning was the star of the show, finishing in 9th place. So that's the Super Cup from Silverstone. Now our attention turns towards the Grand Prix this afternoon. Take a little while before we're all ready to go, but we'll be bringing you all the action here on Sky Digital Plus. From the track, let's now return to the studio to John Watson and Matt Lorenzo.
Thanks very much, Ben. As we look at those pictures of intrepid motorsports fans braving the elements, with the confirmation we've just had actually from the pit lane that summer has been cancelled this year, which is a blow to all of us, although...
Well, did you miss it?
Well, the thing, yeah, exactly. I have two questions. One, we're one of the most invaded nations on earth. Why, for example, when the Romans got here wearing skirts, landing around Dungeness area, did they not turn around and go back home because of the weather? But we'll save that one for later, in fact. And secondly, bearing in mind the weather is totally unpredictable and could be wet, there are some drivers who would be quite happy with a wet race. Why is that?
Because they think they've got an advantage. They think, particularly those with the Bridgestone wet and the Bridgestone intermediate, which is really the big advantage, because I think the Michelin wet has probably now come up to almost parity with Bridgestone. It's that transitional phase in a race. If it starts wet, 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 there's no choice. You've got to start on a wet weather tyre. If it then moves through a period where there's a drying line, but it's never going to be dry, and you want to make your pit stops because you're going to have to come in for fuel anyway, you may opt to go on to the intermediate tyre, and that's where the Bridgestone tyre advantage lies. And of course for people like BAR, Jordan and Sauber, those are the three principal teams in running on the Bridgestone tyre behind Ferrari. Never forget Arrows as well. Then they would see that as being working to their advantage, and if they did run on the intermediate tyre, then you'd expect to see a Ferrari 1-2. And as I said, in fact, I think on our Friday broadcast, for the performance that we saw from Fisichella on Friday, indicated that they could even sneak onto the podium. But you're asking for a big ask, and it would have to be wet, and it would have to stay wet pretty much through at the point when you're doing your fuel stops. Then you'd go on to the intermediate, and then that's where your advantage would come by.
Well, if we take a look at the grid, Montoya on his 4th pole on the bounce, that's a terrific record, whatever happens in the race, really, and proof that he could be, I say, a rival to Schumacher if they had similar equipment.
Well, if it's a dry race, I think it's going to be very interesting, because depending again on the choice of tyre, and Eddie Jordan was very open about what his team are doing, and he sort of alluded that Ferrari may have gone one with one tyre choice, one with another tyre choice, Ferrari indicating they may have got identical tyre setups. So it's all uncertain, but what is clear is that Michelin have made a step forward with the tyre they brought here to the British Grand Prix. In fact, it plays more to the Williams advantage than it would have done to, for example, McLaren, who benefited from that slightly softer tyre compound that we saw in the Nürburgring for the European Grand Prix. So McLaren are slightly less benefited by this tyre change than Williams will be. And if it stays dry, it will be a question of, will we see Ferrari repeating what they did in the Nürburgring and running fairly light fuel loads and clearly going for the two-stop strategy, which is what they did, or will they just try not to be too clever? It's just a guessing game and just let the race come to them. They feel that they've got the better race car, they've got the more reliable race car, we know that. And from now on, Michael Schumacher doesn't actually have to win races. He's just got to get on the podium to ensure that he concludes his 5th World Championship.
As we look at the other half of the grid, Jaguar, I'm afraid we've done to death, and let's hope they can improve upon a lousy weekend so far. But what about Takuma Sato? There he is on the grid there, but in warm-up, 5th fastest, 4th fastest?
4th fastest. I mean, great time. I mean, did a superb job. Indicative of the amount of fuel they had on board. Again, confirmation from Eddie that they were running on the hard or the different. There's an optional and the prime tyre, and they were on what I would consider was the optional tyre. And if you can get temperature into that tyre and you've got balance, it's actually probably an easier tyre for a driver like Sato to use. While it doesn't have the ultimate grip that the prime tyre has, it's probably more consistent, and therefore for Sato it might enable him over the course of the 60 laps to get into that rhythm more easily and make a car easier to set up. But starting in 14th in the grid, it's a big ask to try and ask him to get into the top 6, let alone anywhere higher than that.
What about the pit stop strategy? Of late, that's made for some fascinating viewing, hasn't it?
At Silverstone, 2 stops are the way to win the race. That's what Hakkinen did last year. Michael went on a 1-stop strategy and lost out in doing it. Hakkinen won at a canter by 33 seconds. So I don't really think anybody's going to try and do anything differently, unless they've got their own meteorologists, which many of the teams do. They've got people outside the circuit with radar scanners scanning the weather, and they're getting literally by the minute, well, by the 10 minutes, updates on what the weather is doing. So those will be working overtime to tell the teams, is there any chance of rain at any point during the race, because that will affect what they want to do. Now, if they know that rain's going to come within maybe 5 laps of a scheduled stop, they can adjust their schedules accordingly. So a lot more goes on the pit wall and behind the pit wall than even we get to see, and that information is privileged information.
What about the private battle within Ferrari? Barrichello beat Schumacher last time out and has been faster than him so far this weekend. I mean, will Schumacher be thinking about that as you...
Matt, wake up. Have you been watching this year's championship? There is no battle going on in Ferrari. There was a situation where Michael made an error, and we saw on the replays in the Thursday show there was actually small amounts of debris in the track, which may have caused Michael to have that spin off. Had that not occurred, I suspect that you'd have seen Michael getting past Rubens one way or the other. But when that spin occurred, then they had to redo this strategy. And after the pit stops were played out, the final pit stops, Rubens was ahead, and that was what the team chose to do.
All right, time for a short break now, and then we're back with the continuing saga that is Juan Pablo Montoya. Let me also remind you that you can now buy a season ticket that gives you all the great interactive experience for just 50 quid, and that's for the whole of the rest of the season. You can do that by calling 08702 418 111 or by hitting the red button on your handset as soon as we come off air. We'll be back at 12 for the Foster's British Grand Prix with the green light due at 1. Ferrari have now had 45 consecutive races with at least one driver on the podium. It's a stunning record. Can they keep it going? Well, join us a little later to find out.